Okay.
The cloud is easy to share.
There we go. So before we launch into the details of the content this evening, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where I sit, the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people. We come together from many different lands. Let's pay our respect to elders past, present and future. So I heard someone say recently, it's always valuable to begin a learning experience with connection before content. And here's a little way for us to connect. I'm using a platform called Slido, and I'd like you to join Slido so that we can interact with one another. A lot of people in online learning prefer to have their cameras off, and that's fine. But as a facilitator, it's really important for me to have a sense that you're there and you're engaging with what I'm sharing with you. And this is a wonderful way to do it, this platform Slido. You can get it for free and have 5 different questions or interactions through Slido in one presentation. So as we move to online learning again, this might be something that you'd be interested in learning and using with your students as a way of checking in for understanding. You can join by going to slido.com and typing in that number that's there, 875426. And then I'd like you to type in where your community language school is located. Oh, fantastic, Wagga Wagga. It's so exciting to have someone all the way down there in Wagga Wagga. That's about 6 hours drive from where I sit in Newcastle. The Ponds High, okay, that's I think in the western suburbs of Sydney. Parramatta. And this is a cloud, I think it's called a cloud feature. So the ones that get entered the most get bigger. So we can see we have more people here from Ponds High School than the other locations. So I'll just give you a little bit more time to enter your location here as a way of me connecting with where you're all sitting. That's great. Okay, just finishing up in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And now let's move to the next question that I have for you. What do you hope that your students carry with them from their time spent in classes at your community language school? So this is a kind of a deeper way to connect with you as volunteers in the program, as volunteer teachers. Can you think of a few words? This one's not a cloud, this is a short answer. A few words that describe what you hope students get from their time spent in classes at your school. Passion for their language. Lovely. Language skills, identity, and Sri Lankan culture. Culture and language skills. Meeting friends, yes, connecting with each other. So, insight into culture, language, and practices. Language skills and culture. Language skills. I mean, this is really interesting for me to hear in light of where I'm going with you this evening. Lots about language, culture, and friendship and connection. Okay, I'm finishing up in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you for your sharing there. So this evening, what are we going to do? What can you expect this evening? We're going to explore concept-based curriculum. What is this? Why do Nessa and Akara want teachers to use this approach to curriculum design? What is its value? I don't know if you can hear that big noise. Newcastle is a port city. There's a big ship blowing its horn out there. So what's the value of concept-based curriculum? Why does the research and why do the authorities like NESA, the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, and ACARA, why do they say we want teachers to be using concepts in their curriculum design? And so we'll look at that, and then first steps in planning to deliver such a curriculum. That's what we're doing this evening. And why? Because this will empower you to design great lessons which will add meaning to what you do in your classes and heighten the engagement of your students. So adding meaning and heightening engagement for the learning in your classes. And how will I go about this with you this evening? I'm going to present some theory, some information, ideas and examples by talking, by sharing a couple of short videos. I'll engage with you through Slido, which we've shared a couple of screens using Slido already. I will introduce the scope and sequence template, and then we'll finish with a look at the Q&A. So there is a question you might see if you're using a device or even on a tab, you can see in Slido there's a Q&A feature. So as we're going along, if you have any questions at all, please type them into that Q&A, and so I can address them later on. So 21st century education. Here is a slide from NESA, New South Wales Education Standards Authority. And on the left, you can see then, in the past, what education looked like. And on the right, you can see what we're hoping for, what NESA wants to see in language classes. This particularly comes from the languages section. You can see up the top there a reference to the Modern Languages Teachers Association. This was used in a presentation for language teachers. So what NESA wants language teachers to be doing in the classroom now is on the right. And if you go down to the third one, you can see coverage of textbook is what we used to have. I remember when I started teaching about 25 years ago, my first position was in a lovely private girls' school in Mossman in Sydney called Queenwood. It was very prestigious and they prided themselves on how progressive they were with their education. As a language teacher, I was given the textbook that the students used, and I was expected to start at the beginning and work through to the end. And that was the approach to language education back then. But if you look on the right there, using a textbook as curriculum is on the left, coverage of textbook on the left, on the right, backward design focusing on the end goal. So we don't just take a textbook and start at the beginning and work through. We engage in a more conscious and deliberate process of designing, where we start with backward design, we start with our end goal, what we want to see at the end of our teaching. That's where we start, and we'll be looking at that together this evening. And then the fourth one down is using the textbook as the curriculum. So that is the design for all of the course, just starting at the beginning and working through the textbook. But on the right there, you see using concepts and authentic resources. So that's what we're going to have a look at. What is this backward design? What are concepts? How do we use them in our designing of the curriculum for our students? So backwards planning, backwards design. What is this? Like I said, you start with a picture of where you want to finish. Then work out what you need to do to get there, to get to that finish that you envisage. So here's an example of how I use backwards design in my day-to-day life. wonder if you do this. So for example, I want to be at the doctor's at 11:30 a.m. and it's now 10 a.m. So I have 90 minutes. So then I work out, what do I need to do to get to the doctor at 11:30 when I have 90 minutes between now and then? So I think, well, it takes 15 minutes to drive there and 5 minutes to park and get inside. So that's 20 minutes. So I take that 20 minutes off my 90 minutes, or my end goal, which is 11:30, and that takes me back to 11:10. So I want to hang out the washing, which takes about 20 minutes. So I go back another 20 minutes from my end point, and so on. So this is an example of backwards design that I use in my day-to-day life. And I wonder if you already use backwards planning or backwards design in your daily life. Here's just a quick yes, no. Do you use backwards design or backwards planning in your life already? Are you familiar with this process of starting with what you want to end up with and then working backwards to establish what you need to do to get to that end? One of my daughters was doing an introductory uni course recently, and they were teaching the first year uni students about this backward design in terms of planning out their semester of learning in terms of time, like what they needed to get done. Once you know when your assignments are due and you work out how much time you have to spend on research and writing drafts and then writing good copies, then you backwards plan from when the assignment's due and work out when you need to start to get through everything before the due date. So there we go, 15 people have responded and 93% of you say you already do backward planning, backward design in your daily life. Okay, now we're going to have a look at a little video about the power of backward design. So I am going to go to a new share.
Imagine this. A group of friends decide to organise a day out. Katie is excited because she thinks a day at a folk festival would be perfect. Sam is excited because he sees everyone heading out of town for a long, peaceful bushwalk. And Sue is excited because she imagines the group visiting the snowfields and having their first ever ski lesson. The group arranges a meeting time, a place, then get busy with their own lives. On the appointed day, the three friends meet, pile into the car and set off. As time passes, Sam becomes grumpy because the group keeps driving past all of the exits to the best bushwalks. He wonders why he has his hiking boots on. A bit later, Sue becomes grumpy because Katie has turned off the highway away from the snowfields, and Sue is regretting putting her thermals on this morning. She wonders why she has been working so hard on her quads at the gym. An hour later, Katie pulls the car over and lets her friends know that she is lost. By the end of the day, none of the friends have achieved their goal. What if the three friends approach their day out differently? Katie, Sam and Sue get together to chat about what they would like to do. They decide on a common outcome for the day, plan what each will need to do to get ready, and what the group will do together to make sure the day out is a big success. As the weeks go past, the group talks often to make sure everyone is moving towards being able to participate in the day trip. Katie gets used to using contact lenses, while Sam buys a new wetsuit, and Sue speaks about working on her swimming skills. The group also plans what they will need to take, book the surf school, and organise how they will get to the beach. On the nominated day, the three friends meet, pile into the car, and set off. They reach the beach in time for their lesson and have a terrific day together. Backward design is like the second scenario. Teachers start unit planning with the end in mind. They consider the outcomes of a unit of work before mapping out how each individual student, and therefore the entire class, will get there. This way, the learning and teaching in the classroom gives every student the opportunity of reaching the final destination.
Okay. So let me just see. Oh. I've lost a picture of the participants. So I'm wondering, I feel like I'm just speaking into an empty void. Could you let me know in the messages if I'm sharing the right screen with you now? Please move this window away from shared application. Yes, you can see it. Okay, good. All right, so that was a little illustration of, a little illustration of the power of having a shared goal and the power of identifying the end goal before you begin planning how you're going to get there. So there you can see it there. The coverage of the textbook becomes backwards design, focusing on the end goal. What is backwards design focused on? Here's a quick quiz to make sure that you're all listening, because I'm going to ask you about this when I see you on Saturday as a review question. What is backwards design focused on? Can you write in what you heard backwards? Yes, there we go. Yes, the end goal, indeed. That's right. So you've got that. This is one of the aspects of this modern contemporary curriculum design, is that we start with our end goal in mind and then we plan backwards from there. I'm glad you've got that. There it is again. So we've got, we're working out the end goal, what the end goal is going to be, and coming back here to the NESA guidelines, they have said to consider taking a conceptual approach. Back here, you can see 1, 2, 3, fourth down, using the textbook of curriculum has become using concepts and authentic resources. And here, consider taking a conceptual approach to where you're heading. So what is a concept? A concept, in terms of curriculum design, is a theme or an issue that gives meaning and connection to discrete facts and skills. If the definition doesn't really make it clear for you, don't worry, because I'm going to highlight this with lots of examples moving forward from here. But it's a mental construct drawn from a topic or a process that transfers to new situations, contexts, and other subjects. And as I said, ACARA, the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, have identified concepts as important for learning languages, and so has NESA. Interestingly, if you go to the NESA website and you look at the older curriculum, like the framework, the languages framework, which was written in, I think it was 2010, something around there, like it is quite an old syllabus now. There's no reference to concepts. If you look at the Japanese syllabus, which is another one of the older syllabuses, there's no reference to concepts, but there was about 4 or 5 new language syllabuses published in 2019, and those syllabuses all use scope and sequence and units of work and point towards using concepts. And when I was talking with Regina and Melissa Gould-Drakely at NESA about working with you and the direction that they would really like me to focus on in my work with you, they were very quick to say concepts, talk about concepts in curriculum design. That's really where things are headed, and that's really what the teachers need to be thinking about. So here's some sample concepts from stage 1 in ACARA. And ACARA, as I said, is the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. And they were established when Australia decided that it would be a really good idea to develop a national curriculum. As you know, each state has their own education authority. Ours is NESA for New South Wales. And every state is teaching a slightly different version of the curriculum, a slightly different maths curriculum, a slightly different science, languages curriculum. And many years ago, it was agreed it would be great to have a national curriculum so that when students move between states, the curriculum would be consistent. And so ACARA has developed guidelines around what they think a national curriculum looks like, should look like, but the states have been reluctant to let go of their power over curriculum. And so the NESA syllabus incorporates ACARA's guidelines and directions, but it's still, the NESA is who our teachers have to look to for guidance on what to teach. But on the ACARA website, you can select stages and go in and look at their guidelines. And they identify here some examples from, this is the New South Wales early stage 1 and stage 1 equivalent. They call it Foundation to Year 2. And you can see what these examples of concepts are that they're suggesting that we start with when we do our backwards planning. We sit down and we think, okay, what concepts do I want to develop with my students? What do I want to address? And there's things here, as you see, like culture, which was a big one for what you want your students to be taking away. Identity, community. There's not festivals specifically there, but festivals is one that's mentioned in the NESA syllabus guidelines as well. So I hope that is starting to give you more of a sense of what concepts are when we sit down and we do our curriculum planning and identify concepts that we want to address. These are the kinds of things that we're looking to address. Concepts can be a gateway to deep learning that is much broader than language skills. So how do we use concepts to design curriculum for deep learning? We start with one or more concepts for a unit of work. So that could be, okay, I want to address the concept of family when I work with my students this term, or maybe a couple of concepts. I want to develop the concept of identity when I'm working with my students, maybe identity and family. How does family relate to the identity that we form as we're growing up? So we start with one or more concepts, then we take the concepts and choose a big idea. You'll hear people talking about big ideas in curriculum, or sometimes they're referred to as essential questions to address. Then we think, and I'll talk about that some more as we move forward. Then we think about a context that illuminates that big idea, that makes that big idea really alive for the students. And finally, just a point that concepts are all around us and transfer across disciplines. And that's another aspect of this modern curriculum, that it's interdisciplinary, that problems and concepts and big ideas that come up in our languages classroom can get students thinking in ways that they can use in their maths classroom and their science classroom and their social studies and history classroom. Languages doesn't stand alone, and what we're doing in our languages classroom is not isolated from the rest of the curriculum. This way of thinking that we're developing through this style of curriculum is something that the students carry with them through their life. Our goal is improved thinking, deep, strategic, problem-solving, creative thinking in our students. Now, I accidentally closed my link to this before, so let's see if I can open this. No. I was going to share a little video with you, but we're actually getting a bit short on time, so I might just send you a link to this and you can watch it later, seeing as though I have accidentally closed this. It's not critical for you to see now, but it's a really interesting little 3-minute talk where Julie Stern talks about conceptual learning in action. So designing curriculum with concepts, an example. Like I said, we start with one or more concepts. So here's an example. Imagine that I'm sitting down and I think, okay, next term, I want to address the concepts, family, culture, and routines. Then we put the concepts together to form a big idea or an essential question. So for me, this big idea is going to be, does our culture make for different family routines? I am a Japanese language teacher. So when I think about curriculum design, I'm thinking as a Japanese teacher. So if I'm designing a unit of work or a term's work on family, culture, and routines, my big question that I might put to the students and have kind of sitting in everything that I do throughout the term is, does Japanese culture make for different family routines? And then you can imagine we look at what is family routine in a Japanese household? What is family routine in an Australian household? Does culture inform those routines? Does the culture make the routines different? And I can think of lots of ways that Japanese culture informs family routine. For example, at bath time, I lived with a family in Japan that was 3-generational. And at bath time, Oba-chan, the grandmother, always went first. And that family routine was informed by this cultural value of respect for the older person, letting the older person go to the bath first. So this is a big question, a big idea, that our culture actually informs the way we do things day to day. And that's an insight that our students can take with them into their lives. And in an English class, perhaps they might be reading a novel about a young person from another culture. And as they look at that other person's routine as it comes through in the story, they might be reflecting, oh yeah, in Kara's language class, we were learning about Japanese family routine. And this student in this novel is living in Russia. And look, their routine is different to that. And it's different to the Australian routine that I see around me as well. So you can see how it becomes interdisciplinary, this exploration of this big idea. So then we think about a context that illuminates the big idea. The evening routine in a home in urban Sri Lanka, in rural Sri Lanka, in urban Australia, in rural Australia might be something that you would explore. There it is, concepts are interdisciplinary, and the goal is improved thinking. Do we do what we do at home because of our culture? So we're pondering life, we're pondering culture, we're pondering what makes us do what we do. So we add these big ideas or essential questions to our curriculum design. And these big questions keep pointing our students to a deeper engagement with the content. It's not just language, or it's not just culture, whatever that is. There's a big question. What is culture? It's something that's really alive and really always there, and your students might be pondering them for the rest of their lives. They point to big ideas that bring meaning to all the discrete facts and skills that students learn. They make the learning interdisciplinary. They stimulate thought and lead to more questions. And they help us to address our community language school context. This context that you're teaching in is quite unique. It's, of course, different to a day school second language classroom like the Japanese classes that I was teaching. And your context is so rich as a community language school. There's so much that you can share with your students. There's so much existing knowledge that your students bring, their insights that they have from living with their families and hearing the language around them and having connections with family overseas in Sri Lanka, all of that needs to enter into the curriculum design. And when we think about our curriculum design in terms of concepts and big ideas, there is really an opportunity for all of that special context that you have to become a part of the design of what you teach. So here's some examples of concepts from ACARA and then essential questions to guide the units of work that I've come up with. So the concept was communication, and a big idea that might go with that concept is, does the language that I speak change the way that I communicate? This is something that is really interesting to me as a second language speaker of Japanese. I notice that when I'm speaking in Japanese, I do express myself differently. Different values come through, especially in terms of politeness and relationship and hierarchical relationships. When I speak English, I think the cultural value of Australian English anyway is very much one of equality, whereas when I'm speaking in Japanese, it's very important to acknowledge the social hierarchy that I exist within. So the language that I speak changes the way that I communicate. I can be much more deferential in Japanese, but much more forthright in English, Australian English. So there's a big idea that I can explore around the concept of communication. Self, what makes me who I am? A really interesting question to explore when we're in a community language school context and we have students who can be very much in one culture and then in another culture. What about being in those two cultures makes you who you are? There's family. Is family the same everywhere? Respect. How does language show respect? So I hope that you're starting to get a sense of this idea of the concept and the concept being an end goal, and then the idea of that we can bring these big ideas, these essential questions into our curriculum design. And when we intentionally establish what the concept is and what the big ideas associated with that concept are, they can be coming up throughout our teaching, and we can direct the learning towards those concepts and those ideas. Okay, so we're going to start doing a little bit of planning, and we're going to use a scope and sequence to identify the end goal concepts and the big ideas that we want for each term over a year. Now, as I said, there's the Q&A, the question and answer feature exists within Slido, and I hope you've been putting any questions that come up for you in there. And Delina put this question in there before: how can we incorporate multiple topics within a term, as there are many special days such as Independence Day, Mother's Day, etc. in a term? And I found this question really helpful when I was thinking about how we would move through this training together this evening, because there's the idea of topics and special days. And I was thinking how perhaps when we start with our scope and sequence, what we would do initially, you can see the scope and sequence here, is write in these special occasions, these special dates, because perhaps the concept that we choose will address those special occasions. So just going back again, you're wanting to incorporate these special days in the term. So if the special day was Mother's Day, for example, the concept might be relationship to mother or family, or something else, celebration, festivals. So when you're starting out with your scope and sequence, if it's really important to you to address those special occasions, the Sri Lankan New Year, Mother's Day, etc., I would start out with writing those in and let those guide the concept that you want to address in that term. And yes, showing gratitude, Mother's Day. Yeah, the concept of gratitude. Now, there is a beautiful concept that you could spend a whole term addressing, and how wonderful for student well-being and teacher well-being to immerse yourselves in the concept of gratitude and how does gratitude express itself through our language? How does gratitude express itself through our culture? How is it different in Australia and in Sri Lanka? There could be some lovely stories told through addressing that concept of gratitude. And then you might think of, well, what's an essential question? What's a big idea around gratitude? And I might have to think about that a little bit and come back to it, or you could think about it and maybe put it in your scope and sequence. So I think you've already been sent this template, but I'd ask if it could also be put into the chat now, because you can attach files to the chat so that you can download it from there if you don't already have it. And I want us to use this template to write one or more concepts for each term, and then an essential question or a big idea for those concepts. And then if you like, you could start out by writing the special events that you want to make sure that you address each term with your concepts. We're not going to finish doing that now. I'm going to leave that with you, and I want you to try to find some moments, might be like just 5 minutes. If you don't have time to do all 4 terms, just maybe try and do 1 term before we meet again on Saturday. And then we'll use this on Saturday morning as a springboard for then going on to develop a unit of work. So that the first step in this curriculum design, this concept-based curriculum design, is we start with the scope and sequence and think about what's the concept that we want to teach and the essential question or the big idea that we want to address in this term. And even before that, for you, it might be, what are the special events that we want to include in our curriculum design each term? Okay. So here we are at the Q&A. So I'm just going to have a look at the questions here. Okay. Okay, so there's not, well, let's have a look down here. Oh. So I'm not seeing a lot more questions yet. Please know that this question and answer forum will stay open tonight and tomorrow. In fact, it will be open until next Monday. So as you go away and digest all that I've shared with you this evening, some questions might come up. You can dive into the Slido app or the Slido website and put in that number, and you can enter your questions then as well, and I can address them on Saturday morning when we come together. And there's a question here, can we still use the textbook with a concept-based curriculum? And definitely yes. We're not saying to abandon. That little video that I didn't play for you addresses that. We're not saying to abandon teaching the skills of vocabulary and grammar and all of those really foundational pieces that we need to develop language and culture. That can be included in the unit of work, which we'll look at developing on Saturday. So someone has asked, in the unit of work, do we include the big ideas as a question or a rich task the students will undertake at the end of term? Oh, that's a really great question. I like to think of it as an overarching question that kind of sits around all that we're doing. I present it to the students at the beginning of the classes, and just reminding them that this question is there. But I love the idea of also using it as a rich task at the end of the term. And something that's really interesting about these big ideas, these essential questions, is that there is no right answer and there is no definitive answer to these questions. And every answer is the individual student's truth at that time. And so it has relevance and it's correct, for want of a better word. So that in itself is a wonderful thing for students to learn, that everybody can be right with their different understandings of these essential questions. It's so kind of welcoming of who the student is and what their understanding is at that time. So somebody has asked what the scope and sequence is. This document here on the right, this is the scope and sequence. It's a summary of what's going to be taught. So it doesn't have a lot of words in it. It's just like a brief reference to, in term 1, we're going to address, in term 1, well, last term 2 was the Sri Lankan New Year, I think, and Mother's Day. So in term 2, we're going to address the concepts of family and celebration, for example. And then the essential questions that we're going to have as our overarching questions for our learning are, and we write that in here as well. And that's all that we have in the scope and sequence for now. And then we go on and use that as our starting point for the unit of work that's going to be used for that scope and sequence. And the unit of work will include the assessments and the materials, the resources that we will use, and the individual lesson plans. So the scope and sequence is just really identifying the end goal in terms of the concept and the big ideas that we want to be guiding us as we go on and develop our unit of work. So someone said a lot of teachers worry about teaching grammar. How do we incorporate grammar? I will address that on Saturday. So I'll just check how we're going. 7:25. Oh, we're doing really well for time. So where to from here? You're going to work on your scope and sequence before Saturday morning, but no pressure. I know that life is very full on, especially in lockdown, when you have work to do and little people to look after and self-care to address as well. There's a lot going on for all of you right now. So if you don't get to the scope and sequence, don't stay away on Saturday. Come anyway, it doesn't matter. But if you do get some time to work on the scope and sequence before Saturday morning, then we can use your ideas to develop the unit of work, which would be really lovely, to be developing a unit of work from some concepts and big ideas that you have identified as being relevant, as being something you'd like to share with your students. We'll gather again at 9:30 on Saturday morning, and then in Saturday's sessions, I will address any questions that have come up in the Q&A. You will collaborate on the scope and sequence that you have so far. So like I say, if you don't have anything, don't worry, because there'll be an opportunity to engage with what other people have done. And then if it happens that everyone turns up and has nothing, then we'll take some time at the beginning of the session to develop some scope and sequence to use. Then I'll introduce you to 2 different unit of work templates that we can use to develop the unit of work. And then you will write a unit of work using the concepts and the big ideas in the scope and sequence as your end goals. Okay, so takeaways, this kind of wraps things up for us here this evening, but I'd love to know what is one takeaway for you from this session. So a takeaway, you know, it's a bit like when you go to a restaurant and take away, you order some food and you take it out with you. So what's something you're taking out of this session with you? Something that maybe you enjoyed, or something that you're not too clear about, or something that is really helpful, or something that you're dying to know more about, anything at all. I'd love you to enter in here. It's just so I can get a sense of how this is all landing with you in your minds and in your hearts. One thing that you learned from this session. New concepts about teaching. It's really interesting to me as a language teacher. I've been a language teacher for about 30 years now. And so I have really seen this shift in language teaching away from it being just about language and culture, which is what I was hearing a lot of people mentioning at the start as their hope for their students, that they hope that their students would know the language and the culture of Sri Lanka. But it's really exciting that language teaching can address these bigger ideas and these concepts as well as language and culture, and give the students insights and understandings that they can carry with them in their lives. That we're really, as teachers, we have an opportunity to use concepts and big ideas to really nurture the hearts and minds of our students, not just to give them language and not just to tell them about culture or even invite them to beautiful events, cultural events like the Sri Lankan New Year. I was so lucky to attend the Sri Lankan New Year celebrations up here in Newcastle with the community. But if we can learn to design curriculum around these concepts and these big ideas, we're really, like I said, it's a gateway into much more depth of learning than historically we were engaging in as language teachers. Thank you for sharing these ideas and for reflecting back what I thought what I hoped I was sharing with you. It gives me some ease and some happiness to know that some of what I shared has got through to you out there. So I will just, I've got multiple screens, so sometimes I lose my cursor. There we go. I'm going to stop sharing, and there I can see you all now. And right on 7:30, which I'm happy about, because I know that you all probably want to go and have a relax after a big day. Thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you all again on Saturday.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kara. Thanks all for joining.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kara.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kara. See you on Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara, and everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dilina. Thanks, Kara.
Kara, you will be sending me this presentation. Oh.
Stop recording.